Good afternoon, everybody. I'll give it a few minutes for people to load and join in. We're going to be joined today by lovely Lucy and John from Glasgow Wood, who we'll be hearing from later to talk through some practical applications of waste and reuse, especially in the social sector, and what that looks like. I can see the numbers ticking up, so I'll give it a few minutes. Lucy and John, do you want to say hello quickly to everybody?
Hello.
Hello, afternoon.
That's always good to just get a voice in the room that's not mine for the first 15 minutes because it's going to be quite a bit of me this morning. I've got this afternoon, sorry. I've got probably about 20, 30 minutes of me to go through. Unfortunately, Stephen couldn't make it from Zero Waste Scotland, so I'll be taking some of his slides just to talk you through those. And then around 5:30, we'll come to Glasgow Wood. I'm going to get started just very quickly. Those of you who have been to the previous ones will know that this is the step up to the Welcome to Steps to Net Zero program. And we're cool. As mentioned, yeah, so we used to have a kind of a 5-part series. We've done 2 so far. So we've had engagement and travel, where we looked at firstly, how do you engage your teams and your organizations on this topic? Net zero can feel overwhelming. We've then got the travel one as well, where we looked at some of the ways that we can reduce our travel emissions and different options there to reduce down costs as well. Today, we're going to be talking about waste and reuse, which is all around how do we reduce the impact of materials and how do we reuse them in a more effective way? And as mentioned, we've got Lucy and John here from Glasgow Wood, who'll be talking about this later. I think a really interesting practical example of what that looks like. We've also then got energy and buildings coming next month on the 20th of February and buying and selling and supply chain issues of how do we build more resilience into that towards the end of March next year. In terms of housekeeping, so closed captions are enabled. If you would like to use them, they should appear at the bottom of the screen. Please do use the Q&A facility, which I'm just opening up now, so that we've got any questions you would like answered during the session, just pop them into the Q&A and then we'll come to them either as we go or I'll probably come to them towards the end. The copy of the slides and a recording will be sent out later this week, and please do use the chat function as well to say hello to everybody else. Thank you, Beth. So the agenda today is going to be looking at waste, really focusing on the circular economy to rethink what waste means and what does that mean in reality. And as mentioned, Glasgow Wood are here to talk through that later on, but wanted to give some practical examples really of what that circular economy means. Before we get into that, though, we've got a bit of a Mentimeter just to see who's in the room. Let me hit the right buttons in the right order to make sure I get the link over. Send that to everybody. So there's a link in the chat, or do scan the QR code. The question we wanted to ask today is, do you really utilize any other organization's waste currently? Are you working in partnership with another organization to actually use their waste streams or items that they may be producing in a more effective way? Let me see if I can share the other screen, which I can. Cool. Hopefully you can see a graph on people's screens. And this is something we're really going to be discussing today, is around what this looks like. So don't worry if you are unsure or the answer is no, because hopefully at the end of this, you'll end up with some ideas and some exciting ways that you can start to incorporate this. Very resounding. I always like doing Mentimeters because sometimes you do get a surprise series of yeses, but I think this question's shows the challenges here. Cool. I'm going to stop sharing and share my other screen and keep going on with the presentation. So this is where really we come into the circular economy and what this means. So there's these 3 streams here, where we've got the linear economy, where we're taking things out of the ground, we're making something with them, we're using it, and then we're throwing it away. Something like fast fashion is quite a good example of that, where there's a very direct way of extracting resources and then using them. The recycling economy is where we would take resources and then we might reuse them many times. And I think cardboard boxes are a great example here, where it's something that is in production that we can actually use for our own needs, but is often then recycled. The idea behind the circular economy is really based on 3 fundamental points, which we'll define shortly, but it is that idea of how do we make use of what we already exists and keep it in usage for as much as possible, or maybe change the way we're using different items to make much better use of that waste. So while today is that waste topic is really about how do we rethink waste in a way that is slightly more practical and more resilient to a lot of the challenges that we've seen. Recycling is part of the answer. It's not the whole answer. We need to go far beyond that. So a few questions to really ask yourself about getting started with this is, what do we throw away that has value? Are we throwing away things that could be reused more effectively? And also, what are we buying in that others may be throwing away? So we do speak to people quite a bit at Small 99 when we're advising small businesses around things like cardboard boxes, where they're actually buying in a huge amount of supply, but next door they're recycling a huge amount. If we just connect those two organizations together to go, well, if you're buying loads in and you're throwing loads out, surely you can share some of that resource. That's a circular economy. It reduces the amount of waste recycling that one company's paying for, and it reduces the amount of materials that one business is paying for. I think the key thing here is that recycling is never going to be enough, and we need to really move the conversation beyond this so that we're not just talking about recycling. It needs to be a much bigger piece of the picture here. And this is where we get to that slightly scarier systems level thinking, where it's not just about your business or your organization, it's about your role within the wider system and how you're impacting this, and how well you're working with others to keep those materials in use and in flow. And we'll come through some examples later. And again, we'll have Glasgow Wood on to talk about this in more practical terms. But I think we need to identify ourselves as part of that wider system. A really good example of this is moving house. Whenever you move house, and certainly when we last moved, we ended up buying a bunch of cardboard boxes because the removal company had a form that said, do you want 20 cardboard boxes to help you pack up and move stuff? Which we did. In reality, we should have gone to the local supermarket and just got a bunch of cardboard boxes from there because they're a similar quality and we could have just used those. So rather than just recycling these, we could actually do it in different ways. And this is where the three different approaches of linear, recycling, and circular come in. Linear being, we're buying what I did, buying brand new boxes and then throwing them away at the end of it. Well, I didn't do that. We are still using those, but you could throw them just into the general waste. The recycling brand new boxes would be where we're taking those new boxes and then recycling them rather than reusing them. Whereas circular economy, we're taking boxes that exist somewhere else already, and we are then using them somewhere else. Cool. Yeah, let me know the sound issues. Hopefully it is just localized and the microphone is still working. I do have a habit of flying my arms around and knocking the microphone off, so sometimes it does turn off. If that happens, let me know. The three core principles around circular economy are: one, eliminating waste and pollution; two, circulating products and materials at the highest value; and three, regenerating nature. These sound very technical, but there's very practical ways to engage with these. Eliminating waste and pollution is the most obvious one in terms of what we just said. If we look at that in more detail, this is the idea that a linear economy is where we are extracting, producing, distributing, consuming, and then wasting products. We are taking it out of the ground and then throwing it away. As an example, around 80% of all material in the world at the minute is currently wasted and is going through this linear process. For example, if we eliminated all food waste entirely, we would save more emissions from that than the entire of the aviation industry as a whole. So already you can start to see this does link into things like net zero and climate change and the impacts there around carbon footprinting, even though we're talking about a different way of handling waste. In terms of circulating products and materials at the highest value, a really good example would be that technical cycle where we might be reusing materials. And a smartphone, well, actually, once the smartphone is dead, what do I do with it? That could be taken apart and the raw materials taken out of it, melted down and reused, or it could be that actually that phone could just be repaired and its shelf life extended. We also need to be conscious of the biological cycle, though, and going, actually, is our farming being regenerative? Is it being destructive? Is it being resilient? And is it helping things like flood risk or biodiversity? So there are the two sides of this of going, actually, how do we keep these things in use as long as possible? The third action is then regenerating nature, which obviously links in. So how do those ecosystems and agricultural practices help sequester carbon? The photo on the left here is I think it's either an oyster or a mussel farm, where they actually help sequester carbon as they grow, and then they sink to the bottom of the sea or the lake, and then you've got a sequestered carbon level there. And again, we're starting to see this is linking into climate change, where regeneration of these food production systems can actually save 4 billion tons of carbon dioxide each year, because that carbon could be sequestered in the soil. So circular economy is not just about the waste in your organization, but it might be the wasteful processes that the entire organization has as well, and thinking beyond that. In terms of the overlap, around 55% of the kind of way we need to get to net zero is through energy. So the way we're producing our electricity and moving our cars, it's things like electric vehicles, it's things like electric cargo bikes, wind turbines, solar panels, etc. There's still 45% of emissions there that are in the products that we're making and producing, and things like cement and steel and food and plastic and aluminium and how we're producing all of those things still needs to decarbonize, needs to be reused more effectively in order to decarbonize these things. Combining circular economy and net zero accelerates change massively and becomes a much more resilient and powerful system. And this is why, especially the Scottish Government, we do see quite a lot of focus there on circular economy because it's such a key part to net zero. Having just one or the other isn't as powerful as both. An example of this, wine packaging is always a fun one because it's a bit more relatable than me talking about the economics of the world. If you've got a champagne or a Prosecco bottle that's quite heavy, that's around 1 kilo of carbon dioxide to produce that glass bottle. A standard glass bottle is around 675 grams. A lightweight wine bottle is around 525 grams. A can of wine, as you start going down the different form factors, is then 140 grams. A paper wine bottle is 122 grams, whereas boxed wine is then just 69 grams. So if you compare standard glass to a boxed wine, you see a 90% reduction in the carbon emissions there. So again, this is why circular economy starts impacting this, because even with glass bottles, that is easily recyclable. However, glass is very heavy, and especially if you've got like a champagne bottle, the reason why that's such a high carbon footprint is because the glass is so heavy and therefore transporting it becomes much more difficult and consumes more fuel. Whereas boxed wine, you can fit far more of them on a lorry. They're much more lightweight, and therefore you're transporting more wine effectively for every litre of fuel used, and therefore it becomes a much more efficient process. And then the packaging can be reused in different ways as well, in a way that wine bottles can't. So this is where we start to see the differences and the overlapping between carbon emissions and net zero and things like packaging, which might feel a little bit more direct. I'm never a huge fan of this diagram. I always find it a little bit confusing, but it's good to have in here as a reference point. This is the butterfly diagram from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, where it highlights all of the different inputs and re-inputs of the kind of economic process at the minute. This kind of, I think it's 7 or 6 here, R's that I tend to refer to, where we've got rethinking business models, redesigning the products that we're doing, repurposing materials, repairing products and materials, remanufacturing, and then finally recycling. And really, it should be in that order where recycling is the last thing we want to be doing. Oh, there we go. Recover. Well, I knew there was 7. It just animation's hiding it there. So yeah, how do we recover those materials in a more effective way as well, in order to feed it back into the system? Depending on your industry, there are some really interesting industry-specific variations on this butterfly diagram, which I'd recommend having a Google basically and seeing what it looks like. Very quickly, to make this feel a little bit more real, I'd like to do a bit of a treasure hunt. So if you can post into the chat, ideally your organization name, so we've got an idea of who's here, but also 2 resources that you currently throw away a lot of. And this could be as simple as like cardboard boxes or paper or pens. It might be something more if you're in manufacturing. Again, looking at the Glasgow Wood guys, I know there's a lot of kind of unique things that you're throwing away, such as various bits of offcuts of wood and various other things. So if you just have a think about what your organization throws away, and please pop that into the chat. And equally, if you can think about what you buy a lot of, are you buying a lot of cardboard boxes, for example, and throwing quite a lot of them away? That's fine. Pop that into the chat just so we've got a bit of an idea of what that looks like. So if you could pop those into the chat, we'll come to some of those quickly. I'll give you a couple of minutes to do that while I have some water. Nice. Medical gloves. Interesting. Not one that's easily reused, I imagine, David. Yeah, so waste food's a really good example. That's that, if you think about the food emissions, the emissions from food waste, how could we reuse that? Could some of those food peelings or waste actually be remade into other food? I know there's a restaurant, I don't know where it was based. It was a zero waste restaurant where they used to take like potato peelings and then fry them up and then serve them as a snack as an aside. And it was this idea of a fully circular restaurant, which is then, much higher profit margins, much more resilient, had no waste they were putting out or anything like that. Wrapping from food, cardboard. Oh, there you go. Buy a lot of scaffolding planks. That's always a good one. Cardboard. Interesting. Keep them coming through. As you go through this webinar, hopefully there'll be a few more thoughts you have. And just try and link up with each other in the chat if you do see an opportunity there, because it might be you spot something that there's a potential for. The idea here really is to get you thinking about actually how could you reuse what others are posting here. So there you go. Yeah, and even this is the interesting where it gets more complicated potentially is if you individually aren't producing that much food waste, if you're in a shared building, how much is that entire building producing? Could you collate all of that waste up and then sorry to pick on you, David. You probably don't want all this food waste coming to your destination, but give all that food waste to David to then put into the anaerobic digester, which is then going to be a much more effective use of it than it going into landfill, might be the current stream. So while individually you might not be producing much, it is about thinking about that kind of systems level, joining up with other organizations in your local area on how you could kind of reuse or repurpose those materials. Hand towels is another good one there. There you go, Joe. I'm not sure what to do with those, but I imagine that is something that could be reclaimed in a different way than just going into a waste bin. So just some examples here. I wanted to pick up on the car. The humble car is a bit of an interesting example of how this goes beyond just waste and the impacts that having a circular economy mindset can have. So if you look at something like the manufacturing of a vehicle, the production is currently focused on sales, where we're trying to build incredibly cheap, high margin, high profit vehicles. That's the incentive we've got because the idea is that people go out and buy as many cars as possible in order to use them, and we own then the vehicle. However, cars are parked 95% of the time. They're only used for about an hour a day. And on average, there's only one person per car as well. And that brings this idea around of, well, actually, would you spend just so much money on an asset that you're only using 5% of the time? Is that a good use of your money? And therefore, do we need to own the car in order to be using it? And again, thinking more at an organizational level here than potentially individual, but could we actually go to a service level and use something like Co-Wheels, which are quite active in bits of Glasgow, where having one car club car that they install tends to take around 18 cars off the road locally in terms of the amount of parking, because most people have got cars, but they're not using them. So, well, if there's a car club there that we can access that once a week or, once every couple of days we need it, that might make more space for other people who need it. It makes a much more effective use of space within the city and just has a much more effective use of resource. So circular economy is not just the goods that we're buying or selling or throwing away, but it's also how we're using them. An example here being, again, just on that car analogy, thinking of space as something that we're consuming. Well, actually, public transport, and going back to the travel one last time, walking, wheeling, trams and buses use far less space than than private vehicles do. And even autonomous electric vehicles are not going to solve this problem because electric vehicles and cars ultimately still take up a lot of space. And therefore, this is not just technology. We can't just apply a low emissions lens on this. We also need to think about how we're using these assets in a more effective way and ideally come up with new solutions. So, that idea of would we actually would we always own something that we're only using 5% of the time? Could we move to a service model or offer products that we're making out or selling out on a service model that is going to be more effective instead? And I think the interesting thing here is it becomes a much more resilient business model because with a car sharing organization, they have more stable revenue streams. They don't have to build cars to buy them. They've got much lower upfront costs there because then they can, with a few cars, they can generate a much more revenue. It's through membership. It's going to help reduce traffic. Therefore, they're going to want to work with local organizations to implement that. And the materials that are in that car are going to go much further as well. These are quite obviously not everyone can get rid of the car. I'm using that as an example. The idea here is more what equipment is your organization potentially using or owning that isn't regularly used? Do you have a fleet of cameras sat in a studio somewhere that are only used 5% of the time? Could you start leasing them out and connecting up with local organizations to make sure that they're being used more effectively? And that's going to increase the value for that organization, but also means that one, you could potentially lease it out, and two, worst case, it means that they don't need to buy a new camera as well. They can use yours. That goes beyond just the physical as well. It is also the space that you might not be using. Is there an office somewhere that's sat being unused that you could repurpose or lease out as a co-working space, for example? And again, like car sharing, there's quite a few apps out there that you can rent out your office space with as well. Glasgow Tool Library is a great, yeah, shout. Thank you, Lucy or John. I'm not sure who of you got to that first. Yeah, so I think there's an idea here of just how do we make better use of the assets we have, and waste isn't just crisp packets that are going into the bin, it's waste in your organization as a whole, and rethinking that model. So could you start selling your waste? Or could you even be paid to collect others' waste? And I think there's some interesting examples that have gone on around people who are taking materials that people are throwing out and they're actually being paid to collect them, and they're then reusing that and turning that into a product. And therefore, it's a much more resilient revenue stream as a result. Some very quick case studies here of some good examples of circular economy to try and bring it to life. The Highland galvanizers are one that I always tout, I think really interesting. They're taking motorway barriers that you often see in the middle of motorway and dual carriages, and then they're recoating them before that steel becomes too exposed and they need to basically replace the entire unit. That is extending the life by around 25 years, and that is resulting in around a 90% reduction in CO2 emissions rather than scrapping them. So immediately, if you think back to, I think it was session one, we looked at net zero and the definitions of it and a 90% reduction needed, we can do that quite easily without needing to worry about green steel manufacture. Let's leave the steel that we've already produced in life much longer and make the most of it. Revive Eco, these are based in Glasgow, which is a really good example of that, being paid to potentially take away that waste resource. Think of all the cafes, all the hotels that are producing waste coffee grounds. Well, they can go and collect them, start processing them and using it as an alternative to palm oils, as well as being used in things like the cosmetics industry as well. That's a new revenue stream potentially for kind of retail units where maybe, I don't know if they do this, but Ravico, you can imagine they could pay a nominal amount for the coffee ground waste that is being produced. And then that's going to keep the resources in use much longer as well. So I think there's a really good example here of just that circularity in progress. Reset Scenery, another good example, who I believe are Glasgow based. Apologies for the Glasgow examples. For those who aren't based locally, there's a lot of unwanted props and scenery coming out of the arts industry. And actually those theatre and film event sceneries, it's quite expensive. It's often bespoke. It's often single use to a certain extent where it can only be used once. So what Reset Scenery do is they actually hire out the stock and they will then repurpose it for different kind of different shows. They'll refurbish it for different uses or reuse it in production and just cut that cycle much shorter. So rather than it going straight through where you buy a bunch of kit for a theatre show and then get rid of it at the end of life, well, give it to Reset Scenery. They'll be able to reuse it, repurpose it, refurbish it, or if they need to, recycle it at the very end of life as necessary. That's it from me. I'm now going to also just quickly switch over tracks. Oh no, they're in this slide deck, aren't they? Yes, that's very good. Another talk through, put my other hat on for Zero Waste Scotland, who aren't here, unfortunately, just to give a bit more of that strategic top level kind of piece and get my notes out of what they were saying, because it's not my content, so apologies. However, the mission is the same. So sadly, Stephen couldn't be here from Zero Waste Scotland, but it is that idea of procurement and really focusing on procurement, which I think is an interesting angle on circular, where this is where you do start to see the systems change and have that much bigger impact. Covered that off earlier. Slight kind of formatting issue here, but it's the idea of the economic, social, and environmental pieces here, where it's these three dots, also known as people, planet, and profit, where actually this is something that we're all used to. These are the elements of sort of circular economy and just the way that businesses and organizations act that is actually we're very used to it. Economically, there's revenue, there's profits, there's dividends, there's the way we're acting, there's the things that we're buying, the things that we're selling, there's the supply chain, there's the social impacts, things like the use of space, the use of kind of how people are getting to work. It's the impact on local communities and the environmental side, which is coming through much stronger now in terms of carbon footprint, resource use, waste, and things like that. There's a divide of all the three of these, and I think Circular answers all of them. This is a really useful slide. I'd recommend you take a screenshot of if possible, where it is I would say most organizations in the room, if not all, are doing one or two of these things. So for example, are you sharing materials internally? Are you renting those out? Are you trying to kind of produce less waste? Are you reusing or refurbishing items? Are you increasing the amount of recycled content that you're using or that you're using in certain inputs? As we move more towards the right, I think there's some more interesting ones for me, things like designing for disassembly. So if you're designing products, how are you then designing that to be taken apart and repaired again? And there's a really good example, which I forgot to include. It's a company in Brighton called GoMe. I'll just put a link into chat. And they make speakers out of like Bluetooth speakers, but they use post consumer waste where it's all melted down. And then you get these really beautiful sort of marbled plastic casings for Bluetooth speakers that they've designed to not have any glue in them so they can fully disassemble it and then upgrade one part of it, put it back together again, and boom, you've got basically a brand new speaker without needing to have that idea of waste. So very simple ideas, maybe common sense to a lot of you, but I think it's really an interesting challenge here. So I won't go on into too much more detail on this, but the main thing is get a bingo card, go through all of these, circle which ones you're doing, start telling that story because you're probably doing a lot more than you think. And again, this isn't necessarily a new thing to learn. If your organization is used to any sort of business practices or business processes, there's still a lot here in that implementation cycle where you're going to be benchmarking, then you set targets, communicate those goals of implementation, plan, implement, measure, review, update, and then start again and keep doing that iterative process to make your organization more efficient. This is something that I've not spoken too much about, partly due to time constraints, and I will stop talking soon. But it is that idea that this is going to make your business far more resilient to external shocks, because if you're someone like thinking of kind of what they're called, I just had them on the screen, Revive Eco. Their supply chain is far more resilient because they're taking a waste resource that there is plentiful supply of that people are throwing away. That is going to make their business far more resilient to economic shocks, where actually, rather than having to buy virgin grade kind of materials in from abroad, where if suddenly shipping prices go up, they're going to be less impacted by that because they're further down the chain and that's already been absorbed. So far more resilient, far more economically beneficial here, as well as it also being good for the environment. Some key questions to consider and to try and bring this out is really, are the things that you're thinking of a new or unique opportunity, and what is driving that? How do you start adapting to that? Secondly, does that market and supply chain exist to support this? And I think Revive Eco, again, are a great example of this, and Glasgow Wood will come on to this one for you guys shortly, where that supply chain was already in existence. You're tapping into that existing supply of materials to then provide, again, a market that already exists in terms of domestic and commercial furniture. What evidence does it need to be promoted to what evidence is needed to promote that to customers? I think this is a really key one where it is transparency and telling that message and that story really well. How do you want to achieve it and what do you want to achieve? What's the bigger story, a bigger picture here? And then finally, I think the important but potentially slightly more boring one, which is how do you measure and monitor that performance? How do you quantify that? And that might be a carbon footprint. It might be just in terms of quantifying how much waste you're throwing away or that you're not throwing away. And I think this is the problem with a lot of waste reports that I see, is that people focus on increasing the amount of recycling, not reducing down the amount of waste they're producing. And it really is rethinking how you're attracting this and how you're approaching this to go, how do we align our metrics with a good overall? And that should be, for example, the hand towels. How do you actually reduce down the amount of hand towels you're throwing away every month, rather than just increasing how many that are potentially being recycled, as an example? And there might be valid reasons why that's not the case. In terms of some further reading, these are recommended reports that go into a lot more detail. Circular procurement in 8 steps. If you Google these, they'll just come up on Google. So these are from the EU, Green Public Procurement. I'm not sure what the last two are. Interreg project sounds a little bit technical, not that exciting. Procuring for reuse is a really practical guide as well to emissions here as well. So I'm going to skip over any questions for now. Please do keep popping them into chat. This was designed for if Stephen was here, which he is not, sadly. And then I'm going to come over to Glasgow Wood. Lucy and John, do you want to just come on and give a little bit of a kind of a spiel about yourselves, what you do, and then we'll get over to Sharon.
Well, should we start the presentation, I guess, should we? Or if you
Yeah,
want
yeah, do that.
okay.
Yeah, dive in.
See what our roles are.
Yeah, actually, that's a good point. Hang on, let me just put this full size. Have we got full screen? Is that everyone got that?
We can see it. It's still in page mode, but I don't think it matters too much. We can see it really
Oh,
clearly, so
okay.
it's all good.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm my name's Lucy, obviously. I kind of cover the marketing and communications at Glasgow Wood. I studied in graphic design, so my skills really are in presenting information. So I'm kind of learning on the job to work out kind of marketing and like the technical side behind it. So and then both John and I are part of kind of a subgroup that we've organized in the company, which looks at our environmental impact. We've also got a social group because we work with volunteers. So, but John can probably go into that later on.
Yeah, okay. I'm a workshop supervisor. We've got a wood workshop where we make things. We've got a retail space, and we've got kind of a storage logistics sort of area. So I kind of get involved in a bit of operations, quite a lot of procurement, and we also have a product development sort of process, so which aims to be quite democratic in including as many people as possible in what they can make because of the sort of wide range of volunteers we get in. So we have roles, but I guess with a lot of small organizations, we have this in common. You end up getting into a few different things through necessity and trying to get a bit of resilience to get people involved as much as possible. So yeah, we have quite a static role in terms of what we were employed to do originally, but that kind of expands out into getting into other areas, doesn't it? Helping out in general.
Yeah.
Just the start of it.
Yeah.
So these are our three areas that we have to concentrate on and have our goals. We have our social goals, which we are a social enterprise, not for profit. And we have volunteers to come in who come in from various routes, and we have a commitment to give them as best an experience as we can. So that involves looking after them, training them. We have a volunteer coordinator that does one-to-ones, and we just try and keep an eye on everyone and keep them safe and keep them learning. We have our environmental goals, which is, I guess a lot of this aspect will be about what we're going to talk about today. And these are underpinned by the fact that we use almost exclusively recovered materials. And then because we're not really a centrally funded organization, we have our financial goals, which are very important. So we have maybe estimated about 10% funding for various, maybe one or two people that work here get supported posts. Occasionally a fund will be seen and applied for, and sometimes things like hard equipment might be bought with a fund. But essentially we have to make money. So it's like a factory commercial setting, balancing the needs of the environment and the social goals that we have.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess it kind of going back to what you said before, Adam, about people, planet, profit. Like this is essentially that in practice for us, really. So it's not yeah. Yeah. So
this is some of our guys doing activities at our place. We've got we have the volunteers on the top left getting inducted. They'll come in for a short period, like a half a day. Now we do it just with a small number, so as not to overwhelm people. Occasionally we'll do something like this as well, with this sort of setting where we'll occasionally do like workshops and get people in from, I think that particular picture was maybe from a housing association that came in and did a bit of workshopping. So we do a little bit of that, but mostly it's just making and building. But the volunteers, we've got, I think it's 31 active volunteers at the moment. And all the staff that actually are in the workshop as staff members are ex-volunteers. So we've got this kind of pattern of, if we can, we try and recruit from the volunteer basis that we trained.
Yeah, and actually as well to add this photo on the bottom right, the one in the high vis, this is Michael, and he obviously was a volunteer, and he's just recently, it's a funded position. am I
Yeah,
right?
that's right. He's got funded permission for 3 days. Yeah, and it's good. He's never had a officially much I should share, but he's struggled with employment, so it's kind of the first route into being employed. And but it's interesting because the volunteers that are trained, the staff members training him now was a volunteer before, and came through maybe something similar of a historical sort of route. So there's a kind of with the volunteers becoming employees, there's a kind of an empathy and a sympathy that they can have relating to people that are coming in and learning, and maybe learn a bit slower or have certain things they need to be accommodated with. So we try and be as accommodating as possible.
Yeah, and also actually so I don't know how many of you actually looked on our website, but we have kind of within our volunteering section on the page, you'll see that there are kind of 4 roles that people can choose to join the organization in whatever capacity they choose. And so for those that are helping us to build products for customers and for businesses that order things from us, they also have the opportunity to do a volunteer project. So they're allowed to build something which is for their own use at home, basically. So just, I guess it's a way of giving back to them and giving them a mixture of things that they're doing in the workshop that's not just the same of building lots of planters for schools, building lots of benches or whatever, or sanding scaffold board shelving. They've also got the chance to do something that is really special for them.
Just one last thing to say about that is that there's I think we touched on it, Adam, when we spoke the other day. There's a sort of an educational quality to this, where you're kind of sharing people's awareness of circularity and recycling and what have you, and those sort of values.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got different strands of material coming into our place. It's all recovered material. This is waste collections. This is the sort of thing that's common further south in the UK, and it's emerging a bit more now, boosted a bit by legislation forcing construction industry and whatever to be a bit more responsible and sorting their waste. We then come and collect, get an income from the collection, and then we can sort that, and then we just tend to sell it as raw material, just as reclaimed timber off the piles. Some places make this into products where they don't have so much choice of materials, and they'll end up having a kind of a product line. But it's difficult to make a product line out of a material like this because it's very, there's a degree of kind of mixture and inconsistency about your supply, so you don't quite know what you're going to get in from week to week, albeit that we do get a lot of pallets.
Yeah, and you can see here that this is, we obviously get paid to do this service through Community Wood Recycling, which is like a national program, and we do get like a huge array of materials. This is obviously just some of them. We had, I don't know whether that was from the collection we had a collection from the sets of BBC Scotland here, which we just most likely we took it apart and it was sold as individual pieces.
Adam, what you were mentioning before about systems, this is the case where we're partnering with another bigger system that does a lot of the marketing and the bringing the income in. So we're not necessarily generating this income, it's being generated for us by another organization that has got that job, and we come in at the back and just do the picking up and can charge accordingly. So it's one of the partners we've got in terms of like collaboration and partnerships that's important.
Yeah,
I think what's really exciting there is that's where the resilience comes in for me of just that model, is that you're working in partnership with others, and it just means you're a lot more resilient there. So yeah, brilliant.
Yeah, this is what happens when it gets sorted into.
I don't know, it's pixelated.
We have volunteers in our back storage area, and it'll come in off the wagon and they'll sort it into piles, and then people are encouraged to get it priced up, and then so this is a sort of retail stock basically that gets replenished as we go on.
Yeah, so if you come into BF, you'll see that all this reclaimed wood is really nicely organized, and if you looked at it or glanced at it, you probably think, oh, this is a new wood, but actually it's been taken apart, it's been processed by the people that we have here, volunteers and staff.
One of the things that we have with the pallet wood that comes in our collections was that we were thinking about making material products out of it. We started to analyze that, and it's a little bit more complicated than what we do with other materials that we come in, which with the scaffold boards, which is our main material. But something that came out more recently, the market kind of got to a stage where people were buying pallets a bit more readily. So now we've got a sort of change, this adaptability thing of changing as the circumstances change. We've now got someone that buys the pallets off us, so we can just ship out the pallets to this person, get a bit of money for each one. The pallets don't get broken up to make something, they get repaired by that person. So it elongates the length of time those pallets are in the system. We don't have to do anything with them. So it simplifies it for us, gives us a double income of the collection and the selling of the pallets, and it cuts out some processes for us. So that's a kind of a win for us that's happened maybe over the last sort of 6 months or so. This is the sort of material that we're getting by volume, and this is what we originally started with mostly. The organisation started in 2006, and these were coming in at that point, but it's grown. They would come in from local scaffold companies originally, and then later there was a move towards approaching bigger companies to source more material. And that happened maybe like a decade ago, I would say. And so we sourced with a few big suppliers of scaffold board to the oil and gas industry. So this is the core of our product line is based on this material. And what this gives us is a predictable section. Each board is a different length, but they're all the same dimension in their height and their width. So we have a 225 width board with a 37 mil thickness, and that's it. And we get thousands of them in. So that gives us a continuous supply of waste, which is of the same section, which allows us a continuous product line that we can make and get brochures printed and know that in a year's time we can make the thing that we can make now, because we know we've got these boards coming continually. And we can, so that's kind of like a real advantage we've got, because we can tap into that waste market from up north, from oil and gas. We have this. So we've had collections. We've had scaffold board. This is the spruce material they get in. This is again intercepted waste that would maybe go to biomass or chip, and it's from big sawmilling enterprises, commercial sawmilling, and we get their B grade. You can see on some of the images on the right, there's sort of knots and shakes and things that don't fit their A class grade material and wouldn't stand up to, you know, maybe building regs or whatever. So we get this material in, and that is a kind of a new stock, if it hasn't been used before in the same way that scaffold boards have, but it is kind of quite twisted and bent and what have you. But again, it's a ready supply. We have a little bit of less control over this in terms of what is coming in from there, what waste they generate from week to week. So we'll just get a list of stuff that's available, and we can kind of choose to a degree, but essentially you kind of get what's presented to you. But it still gives us this was something that occurred maybe 4 years ago. Not relying just on that may not live forever. Let's get collections built and promoted. Let's get another material. So these spruce, this spruce material came in just as a build with spreading the risk of not being able to get a particular product in or particular material. This is mostly sold as raw material. We don't really make things out of this so much. It's more just sold as is. There's a lot of fence slat material on posts and that kind of thing. So it's all gone.
Is it going to kind of joiners, that trade people of?
Yeah, we have a lot of joiners, and we have a lot of it's that kind of people, just people who are doing stuff with it. So it's the best way we can sell stuff is just to get stuff in and put it out the door straight away, and that's how we get the biggest income off it.
Yeah. So I guess this is examples of what we make from the scaffold boards. Basically, we've got a huge range of both indoor and outdoor products. I think most of the range that we have was made from the funding that we got from the Communities Fund. What's the logo with the cross fingers? Anyway, that's it. Big lottery. That's it. So we had quite a big range of products, which gave us a boost from that. And there's been a few additions and slight modifications as time has gone on. I don't think you have anything else you want to mention about
no
products.
just the width, just the consistency material. We can
Yeah.
we can have that range like this because we can get material,
Yeah.
and it relies on that supply. We do other this is more bigger projects that we get involved in. So again, a way of kind of broadening your possibilities. We've got, well, because we're a social enterprise, we try and we work with social enterprises so we've got a food pantry here. We've got a collaboration on the bottom left, which is an outro. Yeah. But that's a partnership again that we've got with an hunting system. So we've done a few versions of that around the city. We've got another project with them that's around a sort of modular bench system. So collaborations like this, where we, again, not generating the income as such, we're more like collaborating with someone else who's then generating the income and we benefit from that. So it's kind of trying to spread the possibilities. We've got sort of interior cladding, top left and bottom right, and then we've got the metal bench range in the middle at the top, where we've started to do a little bit of this, where we start to use metal and maybe make a few more sort of contemporary design ideas that can, again, widen. All these things have got work in progress, but there's more to be done for sure,
And actually, to add as well, this photo on the bottom right, you can't quite see it, but within there is this was the Queen Margaret's Union, I think.
Okay.
But they asked us to, obviously the kitchen area there, the service area was pre-existing, and they asked us to reclad the units, reclad everything, just to, I guess, give it a refresh and make it a consistent identity. So I guess it's nice to be able to build on what already exists, really, rather than rip it out completely.
Okay, and this is sort of planters, a lot of garden products we make. Bit of bespoke, we do a bit of that. We've got ongoing sort of training with people training other people to use some of the software to do drawings and what have you, which are required for bespoke. Bottom right, we've got some signage we've made because we got a little bit of funding to get a CNC machine, and that's kind of an emerging thing. One of the challenges we've got is like resources. We have our quite stretched for resources, and so it's getting things like adequate training in place, adequate staff development, things like this. So again, these are kind of ongoing challenges that we've got.
And actually, one more thing to add, you can see this, what's a mud kitchen?
Oh,
Mud
yeah.
kitchen. Yeah, so the lid for this mud kitchen was actually a piece of reclaimed material that came in on Wood Collection, wasn't it? So it's nice to have people contact us for a bespoke piece, and then maybe, oftentimes we think, oh, there's another material that we might have had from a Wood Collection that we can reuse in that. So it's nice to reuse more than obviously just scaffold boards. You can see the main body of that mud kitchen is scaffold boards, but the lid was a pre-existing piece. So yeah.
Okay, so this is a pallet wood coming in, and this is where we were kind of thinking that we would need to do something with pallets because we didn't have this get out of selling them. So we've still got a couple of these on the go, like cladding on the right hand side. Cladding also could be made out of the spruce that I was talking about, so that doubles up as a design. And also some of the elements of design are interesting, where trying to make things that aren't massively complicated so that a lot of people can get involved in making them. So making it as accessible as possible to different levels of skill levels,
Yep.
How many more have we got? 11 out of 18.
7.
That's fine.
Yeah.
This is another strand of material that we get in, which again is kind of B grade stock from a hardwood supplier, another social enterprise actually, and we get a lot of boards that they maybe wouldn't sell in their shop, and they're often a bit bent, slightly odd shapes,
split,
bit stained, bit twisted. But we can either use these as in one piece, or we make smaller items like chopping boards and platters and things like this, which are quite popular. But it's another strand that we could probably do with more. We could do more with, I think.
Yeah, it's a hardwood.
Sorry, guys, I'm just conscious of time. Very quick, are you able to jump forward to one of the slides you've got later on about the sawdust?
Yeah, we can.
That's a really interesting one.
This
is the last one, which is barrels. So this is oak material. We've done a bit of research on what to do with this and how we can kind of do more with it.
Yeah.
Again, ongoing processes really. I guess one of the things about waste, Adam, we benefit from being in the middle of it, we're getting other people's waste coming to us. This is the waste from COP26. A lot of this plywood that you see on this slide, and then the bottom left, the bottom right is plywood material that we get a lot of in small pieces. But we design around the small pieces and make components that make up crates.
Yeah.
So it's an example of trying to design your way around what you're dealing with.
Yeah.
But yeah, we have the waste stream we have. It's what we try and do is kind of exercise a hierarchy of what we do with it. You know, the waste comes in from above, from the scaffolding and all the rest of the collections. We try and sell it and get it out there for somebody else to use it. We try and make stuff with it and get it out. And then we use, for the offcuts, we try and organize our offcuts as efficiently as possible. Then we can make the top right slide there is a design built around small offcuts that we can make.
Yeah, we've got a stock product called the egg stool, which is made from the offcuts, which have been arranged and organised on that top left corner. That's the workshop.
Then it goes down to, like, after we've got offcuts, we can't do anything with. They go in the furnace, which heats the workshop, which is in the middle of the bottom of the slide there. And the stuff that comes out of the furnace on the right is the metal bands on the end of the scaffold poles that then go into the metal recycling that then go to EMR down the road that we get a few pennies for, but not much.
Yeah.
Really, we have like sawdust. We generate a lot of that. The clean sawdust that comes out of our extractors dedicated is quite good and not any sort of toxic stuff in it. So that can be given to horse, stables. Then we get more rubbish kind of swept off the floor that's contaminated. That has to go to Queensley, go to the tip. And then we get other examples of waste that we struggle with are places plastic strapping that comes in with material that we get in coming in off articulated lorries and on pallets. This is intercepted to a degree. I've started to intercept it a few years ago. We're gathering quite large quantities, which we've done a little bit of experiment with, what you can reuse it for, but haven't really come up with a solution with how we can actually recycle it. So we get quite a lot in, and we're kind of looking for people to take that as a recycling, as a reuse. It's given away. So one of the things we do with that now is I've got a free box at the front of our retail space, and we just give stuff away for people who want to use it. So that goes for things like, you know, plastic containers that could be in a big lump. We get a lot of 5-litre tubs with material in. They get cleaned, go into the free box. We could recycle them, but we put them in the free box and someone could take them away and use it for their thing, and then they can recycle it after the event.
This plastic strapping, for example, I can't remember if it was the plastic or the fabric at the top. Was it a school that took some or a community group that took some for a workshop? We're kind of yet to find out what the result of that was, but I guess that's an example of keeping it in use for a little bit longer. Yeah, and just holding on to it and storing it if we can, which is what we're doing now. It's stored in big bags upstairs. But this is an example of where I try to initiate partnerships with other people to do what you were referring to, Adam, about piggybacking, forming a system of collection. Is there anyone out there doing that? I've not found that. And but the amounts that we get aren't big enough for commercial balers to go and recycle it at, you know, at the big recycling organisations that make plastic, you know, picnic benches out of this sort of material. We don't generate enough to get that into a ton bale, and we haven't got a baling machine to do that. So there's some sort of, you know, there's struggles there about getting that done.
I think this is the key thing. It's just how efficient, just how efficient your kind of operations are, and how even if you are generating waste, there's still ideas of how to reuse that and do it, which we really want to speak into. Just very quickly, I'm just going to open up the floor to Q&A. If anyone's got any questions, kind of for yourselves, let's just see if I open the chat. And Beth, I'm not sure if you're there and just wanted to give any kind of quick examples around kind of offices as well, just before we round up. So yeah, thank you, Lucy and John. That was amazing. I think.
Will I start sharing screen?
Yeah, just for now, we're just going to open it up to kind of Q&A, and I'm very aware that obviously what you're doing is very kind of physical, and it's like, well, actually, how from an office point of view does that waste kind of parry as well? But yeah, please post in chat any questions for the Glasgow Wood guys. And then
one of the other things we do is behaviour, you know, trying to get, like we talk about the education of the thing. It's on the micro scale, the people scale, you know, how getting people to put stuff in the right.
It's just
and all these kind of like just sort of more social kind of things to get in.
It's a small nudges. Beth, how have you found that in offices? Have you managed to convert people to?
So I was just going to come in briefly at the end, just given the number of folk in the chat who said that a lot of their waste is food packaging and bottles and things in an office location. So thanks to Glasgow Wood, that was really inspirational. I'm going to go off on your website and look at all the stuff you produced. It looks absolutely brilliant. But so I work for SCVO, and we've been doing quite a lot of work internally around staff engagement, and we're certainly not perfect, and there's lots more we can do, but just a few examples of some of the things that we've tried to implement over the last year and have plans to do in the future. So we're We're encouraging staff around not buying food that has packaging on it, bringing your own lunch. We're thinking about doing some challenges around, you know, how much waste did we produce as an organisation, and having a target to try and reduce that and try and make a bit of a game out of it to try and get staff really engaged. We've done things like rented cameras, just when you were saying, Adam, about using video equipment. So we now have rented them when we've needed them rather than expensively buy something. We use social enterprises for all of the catering that we buy in SCVO now, and wherever possible make that locally sourced, so to try and reduce again sort of food waste and air miles and travel miles and so on. And things like our events that we run the big gathering every year, and this year we encouraged everyone who was taking an exhibition space to reduce all of the merchandise that they bring and put on their stall. It worked for some organisations, less so for others, but we'll keep kind of banging that message and encourage people to, you know, less single-use plastic and those kind of things. So there was just a few examples of some of the things that we've thought about, and we've got lots more to do and more to consider, but those types of really practical things around engaging staff and thinking about what they throw away, as well as what the organisation wastes and throws away as well.
I think that supply chain thing with the food as well on social enterprise is such an interesting one, because I think supply chain is always going to be the biggest problem. I think putting my net zero kind of carbon footprint hat on, supply chains are always the biggest issue. But if you can start aligning with other organizations who are doing the same thing and working in the same way, then even if they're not perfect now, if they're working in the same direction as they progress, you're going to progress as well. And then therefore your footprint and your elements will start to reduce. Just to wrap up, I'm conscious of time. Let me come to next steps. So the climate confident kind of scorecard, this is a really useful, if you're looking at what kind of some ideas of where to get started, this is a fantastic place to get started. There's a link in the chat just gone in for the scorecard. So do take this. This will very quickly, in about 5 minutes, give you some a quick assessment of where the key hotspots in your area, in your organisation are. Just lost the ability to talk at the end. And will then give you ideas of where you can take more action and some ideas to get started. Please, please, please do submit a story to SCVO. We are desperate to try and find these kind of snippets, and people like Glasgow Wood are a rare breed of just trying to find people who are willing to actually share and celebrate and champion and inspire people of what they've done. If you're doing good stuff, no matter how small, even if it's reusing kind of, you know, little gloves or paper towels, whatever it is, through to full business model stuff, we want to hear that. So please, please do submit a story. And again, there is a link on the website to that. Just enterprise as well. Do go check out the website. There's a bunch of information and extra support for you there, from advice to starting up from scratch, as well as leadership programs and more workshops like this. I'm enjoying all of the links flying into the chat without me having to do everything. Thank you very much for that. And yes, Buildings and Energy is on the 20th of February, where we're going to be looking a little bit more detail about energy within the organisation and how you can start saving it. And again, Glasgow Wood, great example, quite a challenge there in the fact that you're in a massive old drafty warehouse. So how do you start addressing those impacts, and what can you do around that? So yes, there's a link into the chat, and we'll see you there. And any questions, to get in touch with us, Lucy, John, is there a best place for you to get in touch, for them to get in touch with you, or just through the website? Or
well, I mean, my email address is marketing@Glasgow Wood, and John is innovation@Glasgow Wood. So if you want to speak to us directly, just follows the same format as the address on the contact page on the website.
amazing.
Instagram, you could have messaged on Instagram as well.
I'm active the one on the Instagram, so yeah.
Cool, that's great. And yeah, I'll pop those to chat and go from there. Hopefully see you all the next one.
Oh, yeah.
Cheers, guys.